Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. Today, we're going to be diving into a conversation all around data privacy. But before I get to all the questions that I've got for you, would you mind giving everybody a really quick introduction?
Sure. I'm Nalini Kaplan, the founder and creator of reThink Trust and the Data Protection Dynamics Framework. And I've been doing work in relationship building, trust building, and data privacy for a couple of decades now. And I'm really happy to be here.
I'm really excited to have you here for the conversation. When we were prepping for this, we kept going for a while because there was lots for us to talk about. So I'm excited to kind of bring everybody else in on the discussion. And to get us started, to kind of like lay the foundation for our discussion, can you share what you see or like how you see most companies approaching data privacy today?
Sure. Most companies start first with legal compliance, and that's understandable since there's been a recent proliferation of statutes. And then in the United States, certain industries, for example, financial services, insurance in particular, healthcare, have been regulated sectorally. So they've had data privacy, data protection requirements for quite some time. And since 2018, when the GDPR in the EU became an actual regulation, not just a directive, and the legislation in California, first the CPPA and then the CPRA, there have been many since. I think we're up to 17 states now in the US that have state-based data privacy statutes. So it's a bit of a duck soup out there. And that has been the focus, I would say, the primary focus of many organizations. They want to make sure that they've got legal requirements met, so they focused on compliance in a legal sense. More recently, since the advent of large language models in the AI space, people have been looking to see what privacy concerns, what ethical concerns they might need to address as part of their internal governance. So we're starting to see more maturity, particularly with larger organizations. And what I've not seen are many organizations that really think trust and privacy first. There's a lot of talk about that, but it's much harder to do. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. Well, I think then we're going to kind of start segueing into what does it look like to build that trust? And I think when we were talking about this, you used the term becoming the benchmark of trust. And I really loved that wording. So I wanted to make sure I kind of put that forward as we start start this part of the conversation.
Well, with the proliferation of various technology, the advent of the cloud, now AI, there's a lot for leaders to deal with in companies. And just making sure that you protect your data, that you've got good information security, cybersecurity is an ongoing endeavor, a series of initiatives for organizations. So that's going on in the backdrop, along with all of the things that happen in a competitive market space. And so privacy came along and was parachuted in. And I like to invert that and think about, well, wait a minute, what's privacy really all about? It's very culturally based. In the US, legally, it's focused mostly on consumer data rights. So when we buy something. In other jurisdictions, other parts of the world, privacy is considered a basic human right. And that key distinction adds a layer of tension sometimes to companies here in the US, where it's been more about unbounded use of data for various purposes, unless it's prescribed not to, as opposed to the other way around. So smart companies are trying to keep up, number one. And I started doing some research a few years ago on companies that I work with, and then also a meta research study of companies across different industries, and came to find the following. First of all, benchmark companies are only 3 to 5%, and those are the companies that say, wow, data privacy and building trust and showing that we do it, not just talk about it, is an inherent part of our business strategy. So in the US, examples of these kinds of companies would include 37 Signals, which is a privately owned technology company. They're the makers of Basecamp, which is a project management tool, and Hey, an email tool. There's a CRM company called Cloze, Cloze, who's built in data protection and data privacy, and again, has it as part of its core strategy. Outside of that, it's mainly companies who are doing something to help protect privacy for either individuals or companies. So think about Proton out of Switzerland, Tresseret also out of Switzerland. And they're really holding up saying, this is our competitive advantage through privacy. And it's very small. That to me is not depressing, but rather an opportunity for other companies to consider what it would mean and to differentiate themselves in this noisy marketplace. But here's what I found in terms of the other companies. Another 15, 20% are what I would consider mainstream now. And I define that as companies who have invested adequately in compliance efforts. They can demonstrate that legally they're doing all of the right things. They've got good systems. They've automated certain processes. And so they're rolling right along. But there's nothing distinguishing them from other companies in terms of privacy outside of that. The majority of companies that I deal with, and this remains true, even though we've been at it now for many years, given the requirements out of California, for example, are still in firefighting mode. And how is this possible? We've got really good people, they're committed to doing the right thing, and yet they're like hamsters on a wheel. And I think part of the answer lies in the fact that state legislatures keep coming up with individual laws. There are nuances to these laws that differ from state to state. It's not just privacy laws, but cybersecurity laws, biometric laws, AI laws, and a variety of other things. And it's just a lot for any organization to keep up with. And I thought, wow, this is crazy making. There's a better way, which if we have time today, we'll go into. And then at the very bottom of the pyramid, or at the left-hand side of a bell curve, are the 5 to 15% of companies that I've characterized as ignoring data privacy. And generally for understandable, benign reasons, but nonetheless dangerous, because smaller organizations actually run the risk of going out of business much more readily than mid-sized to larger organizations. And the folks that are not doing anything about data privacy are usually startups, so they think they're too small and it doesn't apply to them. Or, heaven forbid, they've just encountered a data breach or another serious security incident. So they don't have the brain width and the resources to even think about privacy for trust building, let alone anything else.
So I guess a couple of thoughts here. Number one is this something, we'll start here. Is this something that only tech companies need to be thinking about, especially when it comes, we look at things like, I do a lot of work in the insurance space. Insurance carriers have a lot of data. Is there an opportunity for companies outside of tech to become this benchmark of trust and use it as their competitive advantage?
I would say a resounding yes, because I would contend that every business today is a technology company. When you think about what it takes to run, even if you're a manufacturing company, you may distribute and do certain things on the cloud, right? So that's one example. A second is, thanks to California, employee data is now something that's considered personal data and personal sensitive data. And part of what these laws require is for employees to say, I want to know what information you have about me. And I want you to correct my information. I want you to delete my information. There's some other data rights, but those are the basic ones. And so for any company that operates in California, you now have to consider employees in California if that pertains to you. And so I would argue that every company has to pay attention to this to some level. Now, having said that, I don't believe in generic playbooks and one size fits all. It's take a look at what your footprint is in the marketplace. Who are you serving? So a lot of companies that I work with are not necessarily technology companies in their own right, but they have bundled technology with marketing, for example, in the real estate sector, or they're supporting a variety of clinics and independent clinicians in healthcare. So they're not necessarily big institutions. Or manufacturing. If you think about food manufacturing, or machinery. Again, you've got distribution, you've got employees, contractors, service providers all over the place. You have to understand what you hold in terms of the personal data, what of that is sensitive, and you protect that information differently depending on your industry and the type of information that it is. So let me stop there and see what else.
Well, and I think, I mean, it's really interesting to think about the employee side of this because, again, a lot of times when we're thinking about data privacy, we're thinking about it from the consumer side. But one of the things that you brought up reminded me of a part of our conversation when we were prepping for this, and we were just talking about like the ability to delete data and like asking that question and how many companies there are that don't have the ability to get rid of your data. Like, so can you maybe share some of the insights into like when you, with your knowledge base, are evaluating companies, what are some of those questions as a consumer or maybe an employee? Like you brought up some of them as an employee, but what are the questions that we should be considering as individual consumers to recognize who those benchmarks of trust are?
Okay. First of all, here's some general things that anyone can do because many Americans don't realize they have these rights. So I would first posit to listeners here to look at every privacy notice on a website for companies that you deal with. For fun, ask them what they have about you. I used to do this exercise for personal threat footprints. You know, you can ask Google, you can ask Facebook, you can ask Apple, you can ask Microsoft, LinkedIn. What information do you have about me? Some people who want to shrink their footprint and no longer be on certain social networks, there's a whole series of steps to take. But starting with looking at the notices and asking what they have about you is a good thing to do. The second thing is to take a look at the terms of service along with the privacy notice to go, are they saying your privacy is very important to us, but they've got such general statements that you could drive a Mack truck through them? They're clearly not involved in privacy. And I think the truth is most of us aren't nerds like me that reads those things. They can be very intricate. They can be very long and time consuming. So again, flipping some things, I would take a look at 37 Signals. Look, they have a customer bill of rights. They have one of the clearest and cleanest privacy notices I've ever seen. I use it as an example all the time for my clients and my students. So take a look there to start building awareness for yourselves on, oh, wow, this is how I should be treated, because we know it's important, right? There are also some other organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Even Consumer Reports has a very good data privacy set of tutorials for people. So I would encourage not just us as individuals to do that, but us as business people as well, to gauge where might my customers or my clients be, what might their sensitivities be. And in my work in financial services with insurance providers, for example, they often have to ask very sensitive questions. I think this would be a good addition to their toolkit to build their empathy and to perhaps design even more trust-building experiences for their clients. their customers.
Well, I certainly appreciate you joining me for the discussion and sharing this. I think you probably gave a lot of people food for thought, like you did with me with our first discussion. I think there's a lot of people, especially who maybe aren't in the tech field, that are also even just kind of like, well, what are you going to do with my data? You know what you know. But there's a lot that they could do with your data, and there's a lot of implications that go far beyond what we might be thinking about in this exact moment when we feel like approving those long lists of legalese before we download an app, and just even pausing for one moment and spending a little bit of extra time to read into it and discern for yourself how you're being treated, and spending a little bit of time, like you said, thinking about how you should be treated is a really great starting point for a lot of people.
Yeah, and you just reminded me, I mean, there's some interesting tools out there. You can sign up for Privacy Hawk, and I think they do a free scan, and then you pay them money to have them help you delete accounts. So they go through your email and go, oh, you have an account here, here, and here. So that saves you time if you have a few dollars to spend. Other services like that include Delete Me, which I've used for years. And then on the higher end, but also the most robust, because they remove people from hundreds of data brokers in the United States, which we don't have time to get into today. But it's a company called Obscure IQ. It's first rate. I know the founders. There's also a proliferation of information in cars, in automobiles. So Privacy for Cars is another website that I encourage people to go to and check out.
Well, thank you very much for all of the suggestions and your time today. And for anybody that's not, make sure you go follow her on LinkedIn so that you can continue to learn. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And thank you again, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. If you like what you saw, be sure to come back on a weekly basis and subscribe for more expert interviews focused on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.